We are live, and we have a lot to talk about regarding Cyberpunk 2077 and CD Projekt Red. You know, just when you think things can't get any more interesting or perhaps worse, they do. And we have Rich Hoeg from Hoeg Law to get his perspective and all things Cyberpunk. And I also provided a link to his channel below. You definitely want to take a look at some of the content he's put out more recently as relates to a Cyberpunk 2077. But on that note, let's go ahead and get the show started right now. Rich, welcome back to BRAP. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to sit down with us and chat a little Cyberpunk.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I got to ask you, because I know you're a big Mass Effect fan. I'm not going to ask you which is your favorite Mass. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Sure.
But did you get the feels with the teaser trailer that we saw at the Game Awards?
No.
No. Oh, okay.
No, but I mean, in all honesty, I very much hope that it'll be great. But I have BioWare is pretty much in prove it to me mode for me. It's a new company, a lot of new people. Yeah, they put out a lot of tweets that said, "Hey, we're bringing all the old gang back together." But show me. And truth be told, I like Mass Effect as a series, but as we've talked about in this space and in many other spaces on the internet, I'm going to become known as the guy that doesn't like Mass Effect 2 at some point.
I still don't understand that, but that's
it's never been on that pedestal for me. There's a number of even BioWare games I like more than the Mass Effect series. Wow. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it's great. It doesn't look like it's coming in 5 years, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I'm with you on they need to show me. It's not the same BioWare that your dad grew up with, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if anything, what we're going to talk about today is maybe don't just hype teaser trailers and let things grow a little bit more and then find out whether or not you like something, because there's any number of ways something can go wrong between teaser trailer and release.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think some of that was probably, one of the things, the downside of the industry. There's so much pressure on these studios to, make money and get people excited about their product that we see this. We see these kinds of things. We see these vertical slices and these big promises from developers, and sometimes those things don't come to fruition. And it's something I don't know if that's going to change. Maybe this will drive change. What's going on with Cyberpunk 2077? Because as we mentioned before we went live, it's a good game. It's not a bad game.
That's what I said. Yeah. I have it on Series X. It has a lot of bugs that I would describe as Bethesda-esque and that you can live with. It doesn't have the performance issues that have caused all of this drama that we're going to talk about. I think one of the things that they're kind of getting away with, ironically, is because of the complete tire fire of the launch and everything else that's happening. I actually don't think a ton of people are talking about the design, and I don't love it as much as I thought I would coming off The Witcher 3, which is a game I absolutely adore. And so I think it is a good game. It performs just fine as long as you have an extra generation to push the older game. And if you don't, apparently it's got some issues. But it's also not... it doesn't actually play to me like the 3-time consecutive E3 winner. And like when E3 2000, I think it was maybe 18, whenever they had the closed door, neon lit hallway things, and every journalist went in there and came back a believer. And it doesn't have that feel to me. It's like, well, it's a nice Far Cry game with a really awesome city.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It doesn't feel like the next coming, if you will. Like they kind of hyped up a lot of there are a lot of design choices in this game that didn't make the final cut. Like I think you're supposed to be able to have the ability to parkour, traverse.
Yeah, there was like wall climbing at some point.
Yeah, and they took that stuff out, right?
I mean, they worked on it forever. So undoubtedly there were design things that went hither and yon. And I mean, again, one of the reasons that CD Projekt Red became a company that had so much goodwill is The Witcher 3 launches. It's not great on the consoles. They fix it up. They really do what amounts to their enhanced edition, where they change a whole bunch of the interface stuff. They correct a whole lot of things for free. And the DLC that they wind up releasing to that game is like 40 hours long or longer. It's like a full game, and they sold it for, I don't even remember, $20, $25.
Yeah.
So they built up this reservoir of goodwill, and to some extent, that's still justified on a long enough time horizon. Like, that's still that company. And people ask me in my comments to my videos and things and say, well, do they have massive shifts? No, they didn't have massive shifts in the way their company functions. It's just that this one got away from them. They had never made a first-person game. They had never made anything of this scope or even type. The Witcher was all this company made, and bless their hearts, they made billions of dollars making the Witcher games. But this was brand new, and it clearly got away from them. And then what happened this December should never, ever, ever have happened. And here we are in what might be the worst week of publicity for any video game company that I can recall, not just when I started covering things in virtual legality a couple of years ago, but before that. I mean, you talk about Electronic Arts winning worst company of the year and having mandatory connections for SimCity and the Anthem release and Fallout 76 and all this other stuff. This might be worse. This has an air of deception. This has the DMCA takedown notice kind of stuff in terms of controversy the week before it released. They hid all that imagery. They went out with a statement that was a little bit unclear that we tried to break down in virtual legality. And I think we pretty much nailed it, although I was surprised that I wasn't reading it wrong because of, the implications. And then the investor call that didn't make any sense, and Sony and Microsoft and GameStop and Best Buy and everybody else saying, we don't know what the heck they're talking about. And then obviously culminating really Thursday after hours with Sony saying, fine, we're taking you off the store, which is just apocalyptic for a company that, while it might be acting like Electronic Arts and Activision right now, isn't. This isn't a company with a portfolio of games. They went from The Witcher 3, and it made them a ton of money, and it really helped keep the company going until now. And now you've taken out the biggest video game console ecosystem indefinitely. And people get mad at me for putting that in the thumbnail, but it is indefinite. Could come back tomorrow, could come back in February, could come back never if you piss Sony off badly enough.
Yeah.
And that's an open question.
Yeah, I've heard behind the scenes Sony is not happy at all.
There's no way they're happy.
They are, like...
when I read that statement, when they put up that page and it was something like a statement on Cyberpunk 2077, and those sentences, I think I put in a comment to my video, this is as harsh, as mean as a multinational conglomerate organization can be. This is them absolutely saying, we are unhappy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and you and I started talking about this. I want to kind of give people kind of a time frame of things, because I'm not sure how aware everyone is of how this thing kind of progressed.
Yeah,
and how we got to today, right?
You know, CD Projekt Red knows how we got to today. We'll talk about it.
They probably don't. Okay? They're probably thinking, how do we get here? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of the backlash from in-house developers. I'm hearing from good sources that developers are not happy with upper management. We'll get into that later on. But
yeah,
when
stuff.
Well, it's funny because I heard about this last night, and then the Bloomberg article hits. I'm like, yep, there's my confirmation. So my sources were pretty spot on about this, and they're hearing this from other developers. But you and I started chatting about this game when the whole thing with Dreamcast Guy happened. For those of you who don't know, Dreamcast Guy actually put out a video giving his thoughts, kind of like an impressions video about Cyberpunk 2077. He had received a retail copy early, like some people who order from Best Buy were receiving their copies, I think, a week in advance.
Yeah.
And they were playing the game. I actually know somebody, big shout out to a good buddy, the drunk cat himself, Alcoholocaust, was playing the game a week ahead of time, and he was giving me insight about the game. He did obviously mention a lot of the performance issues that he was coming across. But the thing again, and what Dreamcast guy was saying to me, and you know, and just what kind of the process he went through with CD Projekt Red, it was kind of like, well, hey, you know, they reached out to me, they knew I was doing this video, and this is according to him. You know, it sounded like they kind of knew that they sound like they knew he was doing this video, and basically had said, hey, you know what, don't, no spoilers, no, you know, in-game footage, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And then they take down his video. And, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, like I get like NDA stuff like that, and they have the right to maybe take the video down. But I was like, you know what, I gotta reach out to Rich, because Hoeg might have some more insight into this, right?
Yeah. And I did a video.
Yeah, you did a video with Sony's, you know, kind of how they handled the Last of Us Part 2, right?
Yes.
But you kind of say you provided some interesting insight in the sense that you said, well, you know, this may be a little egregious on their part, meaning egregious on CD Projekt Red's part, based on what we know, according to what allegedly happened behind the scenes between Dreamcast guy and CDPR.
Yeah,
that maybe this was a little bit egregious on their end, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in the before times, before this week starts, there's really two kind of things that go together that lead us into the events of this week. And the one is that CD Projekt intentionally, and you can assign nefarious intent if you will, I think it might be justified in this particular case, but at bare minimum, they intentionally withheld imagery of, most specifically, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions of Cyberpunk. And they also withheld most console versions. And when they sent out review copies, they were all PC copies. And apparently, as part of that NDA, they said you can't use your own footage and you really can't talk about the console versions at all, because we didn't send you a key and you can't hypothesize or pontificate on the console version. So CD Projekt was already trying to lock down the performance of the console versions of the game when all this happened. Then Best Buy releases, I believe it was the collector's editions of the console versions early, because 2020 is 2020, and Best Buy might have done something wrong. They might not have. It's very difficult. Shipping logistics and hitting delivery dates and everything else is just more complicated right now in 2020. So those get in the hands of people that did not sign NDAs. So when you talk about NDAs, you don't have a non-disclosure agreement if you didn't sign one. And the end user license agreement can't say you can't ever talk about this. As we say in virtual legality, and we try to reiterate to people, copyright does not protect ideas. It does not protect facts. So if you come out of the theater in 1980 and say, oh my God, I can't believe that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. Sorry for everybody listening that was a spoiler for, but I think we're past the statute of limitations. If you say that, Lucasfilm cannot sue you for copyright infringement. And if the internet existed and you said that on a video immediately after seeing Empire Strikes Back in 1980, they could not sue you. They could not issue a DMCA takedown notice, except they can, of course, but they couldn't legally. And so when you start talking about the Dreamcast guys of the world, you have exactly the same kind of situation as Sony, which was The Last of Us Part 2 stuff leaked out. They weren't thrilled with that. People started talking about plot elements, and then Sony started DMCA striking everything, commentary, sentences, pictures of golf clubs, whatever it might be. They started pulling them down off the internet. And so I did I think it was a 15 video series about this is not how the DMCA works. And then also going into Sony's history of abusing intellectual property law before to aim it at journalists, and now also to aim it at quasi-journalist influencers on places like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook gaming and anywhere else. So in that, you get to Dreamcast guy. And I think you used the word allegedly, and I think it was appropriate because I got a lot of people saying, well, we don't know whether he took it down himself. We don't know whether they forced it down. We don't know whether there was a takedown. He might have had some stories in the past that weren't entirely truthful. I'm not a follower of his. I don't know the situation. But I do know that there were a lot of takedowns that weren't just him, that did have things like screenshots and 15-second clips of performance on Reddit and comments on Twitter and things along those lines. And so CD Projekt Red, which had long been kind of a golden child of people wanting to believe in a video game company, and I always tell people, don't trust entities, but you can like their products and hopefully they, stand by them, that this can be that when I put up that video that said, well, are they abusing the law like Sony did? People are like, well, I treat it differently than Sony because Sony's big and evil. And CD Projekt Red is nice and gamer friendly. I said, okay, but I mean, this is this is really close at bare minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was really the kind of tilt that I had going into launch week. Now, I never ever would have guessed any of this would have happened.
But even going to launch week, like as we're talking about what's going on with Dreamcast guy, and we're hearing things like, they're being, and I'm at this point, I'm actually thinking back to The Witcher 3, where big shout outs again to the drunk cat who said to me he was concerned about this game because he said, if I go back to pre-launch Witcher 3, we had more context, or more content, I should say, of what this game looks like. People were streaming it, stuff like that, or giving glimpses of it. There wasn't this kind of like what seemed to be they were hiding something. The Dreamcast guy thing happens, and I'm like, I don't know if you felt this way, but I'm like, something's not right here. Something feels off. You know what I mean?
I don't know that I even went that far, because I'm constantly dealing with these questions on my channel, and there are a lot of companies that are just overly protective. That especially when you go out with the Japanese companies that just try to keep things locked down. And certainly over the course of 8 years and the growth in their company, just in terms of philosophy, it's like, well, I don't love what they did here. And I haven't loved it since they first appeared at E3. I can actually, if you go and you look however many years ago that was, into my Twitter timeline, you'll find me saying, I don't think it's a great look for the consumer-facing game show to have all these awards given to a game that didn't have any presence at the show except for journalists. Like, I don't know if you remember, but when they first announced it was all closed door. It was all behind the scenes. We have this 50-minute video that they then curated and put out, I think, 3 months later. Mm-hmm. But like at the time, it's like, that's super weird to have a 50-minute walkthrough that's curated, that you're controlling, only be available behind closed doors, presumably because they had some of the bugs back then that we're seeing now. But I never liked that. And then if you actually go and with this kind of week and what's happened at launch and look back at this cycle that they ran, it was always enormously controlled. It was always, even if you got to play it for a couple hours, like the IGNs of the world, the really big outlets of the world, they weren't allowed to take footage. They essentially had to just remember what they did and try to repeat it in their articles. It was all very, very controlled. And presumably part of the reason for that is that the main version that they were selling, because the consoles, as much as the PC gamers don't want to admit it, really drive a lot of the economics of these kinds of things. Yeah. The main version that they were selling, the quote unquote old generation, as they say in their transcript, but the then current generation, as they started building it really at the start of that generation, couldn't run the games, couldn't run them at all. And one of the questions I asked in my video was like, wow, what were they going to do if the Series X and the PlayStation 5 were delayed? Like, what was the plan? Were they just going to go out with these versions? And I don't think that they would have. I think they felt that there was probably a buffer from the fact that the Series X and the PlayStation 5 run fine-ish, even though they hard crash and do everything else. And I don't know what the plan was. But what you get in going into Monday, which is presumably what we're going to pick up, is a company that has been exposed as deliberately deceiving at least a chunk of its consumer base. And this exposure really came over last weekend when Digital Foundry, which is a fairly neutral kind of platform, goes out and says this is unacceptable. Like, they actually went to the editorial step and said, nah, this is horrible. And then when that got picked up, when GameSpot and IGN and The Verge and Polygon and everybody else start reporting, Digital Foundry says this is unacceptable. That causes basically all the journalists to re-review the game only for those, and you get all these terrible scores, and then you get CD Projekt Red in crisis management mode and actually managing to make things much, much worse.
Yeah, they did make things much, much worse, which is what's fascinating about this whole story is that it's just how bad it's got, and it just continues to get worse. We'll talk about how it's getting worse later on, but when you talk about the Digital Foundry thing, and I read that, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to get interesting. And then you get media outlets like Jeff Grubb, who basically wrote an editorial piece where he's like, look, I feel like I was duped.
Yeah, so I'm of two minds on this, right? So yeah, I read that from Jeff, and he and I follow each other on Twitter, so we spar a little bit from time to time. But there's two ways to look at this. I think he definitely does feel duped. I think they're justified in feeling duped as journalists. However, there is a certain amount of complicity that goes with getting an embargo NDA like that, with those rules and saying, this is okay. I can take what I have experienced and go out with the people that trust me, that read my stuff, and without really generally disclosing all the parameters of what I'm not allowed to talk about, go out with my quote unquote opinion. And I think you actually see this with what came out in their board call with the PlayStation and the Xbox itself, which is that CD Projekt Red was, I don't want to use the word abuse. I don't know that it was that nefarious. They were taking advantage of the trust people had in them as a multi-billion-dollar company with a massive success as their immediate prior game. And so when certification at the PlayStation and Microsoft levels doesn't really look all that great, they basically gave a trust me to these companies that it'll be fine by launch. And those companies said, great, we need, we want the game out. So fix it and it'll be great. And we will approve you for certification, etc. I think that's the same with journalists. I think you basically get these embargoes. They're probably not that unusual, except that you don't get burned by them usually because the big giant corporation says, yeah, you're not allowed to talk about these things, but it'll be fine by the time the game releases. And journalists have a decision to make as to whether to accept those embargo terms, those NDA terms, and just kind of assume that things are going to turn out fine or not do the review. I think we saw some prominent YouTubers. I think I saw Skill Up say, I'm not putting out a review until I can use my footage.
AGC, I think so. I think that's who it is.
Yeah.
He said, I'm not doing this because they're mandating that I use B-reel footage from CD for this game that they put out. And
which isn't, review footage. I mean, that's
marketing materials. That to me was when that happened, I heard that. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm like that. And then I watched Yang Ye's video and he's like, yeah, they didn't allow us to really to show in-game footage. And he's like, that seems a little like shady to me. And I'm like, wait a minute, like something's not right here. This is what what's going through my mind right now. I'm like,
it seems harsher than usual, but there are all of these review copies come with rules. I mean, I don't want to get too far from, like, this might be going over the line, but the line has existed. I mean, the NDAs come with every review copy.
Yeah. I mean, even Sony, like with The Last of Us, said you really can't show gameplay footage past, this part, this part.
Yeah, Abby, I think.
Yeah.
I think they wouldn't let anybody show Abby.
Yeah, they wouldn't. And they were and Sony's been, they've done it with other games too, first party games. But so you're right. It's not unusual in that regard.
Yeah.
But this was a little egregious.
And journalists, or journalists is probably too strong. I mean, we're not talking about investigative journalism. I'm just even critics, just people that are going to observe it and tell people what they thought about it. You get these rules put on you, and that's taking control of the narrative in a way that my hope would be is that, Jeff Grubb feels duped by CD Projekt Red, but that's a reflection that should be happening for all of these places in respect of all the NDAs and embargoes. And what you get is a kind of game theory, Bell the Cat kind of scenario, meaning like if they all acted together and said no, they would win. But if one or two of them do it, they're going to get harshly punished. And so you got to kind of get over the Bell the Cat, the one mouse is going to die. You got to all go together and do it together. So it's it'll be interesting to see if this, which is kind of a seismic set of events, winds up changing anything going forward.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. Jeff's article, I think he mentioned that maybe the media should have been calling this out a little bit more. Because he said, he goes originally because, when I'm writing a review, the fact that I can't maybe show gameplay footage, because I'm not really thinking about it because I'm not putting out a video review. Right. Yeah. But now that he kind of looks back at the situation and he's like, wait a minute, maybe this is something that we should have probably called out. And I'm paraphrasing again what he said, but something to the effect that maybe this is something we should have paid more attention to in the media.
Well, generally speaking, you're not going to have the option to just call out the NDA terms. It depends, but ordinarily the NDA is going to have as part of its terms that the NDA itself is confidential. I've written a lot of NDAs and I've reviewed a lot of NDAs. So it depends. But yeah, it's the kind of thing that everybody should be reflecting on. It seems easy after the fact to say, whoa, that was bad.
Yeah.
And the proper time to say, whoa, that was bad was 7 to 10 days ago.
Exactly.
So it's self-serving, but it's self-serving in a way that I think is necessary and helpful to the overall thrust. So I'm not putting Yang Ye or Jeff Grubb or whomever down. It's just easier to say those things after the fact when everybody agrees that this went horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be lessons learned from this too.
Hopefully,
moving forward. because to me that the review process and what they did and to me was just slimy. They purposely hid things from consumers.
100%. And that's why their apology on Monday was so bad. Is they basically said, "Well, we're sorry we hid all that stuff." It's like, no, you can't just do a flat apology for your specific bad act. You actually need contrition right here.
Yeah, and I think because we get to Monday now, the apology. You know, it's. I read that. And I'm not going to read the whole apology again because it's quite long, but you know, they acknowledged that they, you know, put a product out that wasn't necessarily finished or had issues. They recognized that, right? The thing that really stood out to me though was when they said, well, you know, if you're not happy with it, you can opt in for a refund.
Yeah.
And I think that some people may interpret opt in as, oh, I'm going to get a refund. And that's not really what that means, right? It just means you can request one, you know. Well, but it's really up to Sony and Microsoft. And I thought, like what we talked about before the show, like, and you mentioned this in your video, they clearly didn't have a conversation with their business partners about, hey, this is what we're going to put out in our message, our apology message, and we're going to let consumers know that they're going to go to you for, you know, for a refund. You know, you're going to basically clean up this mess for us, more or less.
Well, they play with the English language a little bit. You know, that refund offer is, you know, if you don't want to wait for updates, you can opt to refund your copy. Opt sounds like it's mandatory or that you will get one, as you suggest. Then you go into for copies digitally, use the systems of the PlayStation or the Xbox. For box versions, go to your retailer, please. And then you get the thing that people gave them a lot of credit for on the day, not really in virtual legality, but we're harsh, we're corporate lawyers, that said, should this not be possible, please send us an email. And a lot of people said, oh, well, you know, CD Projekt Red is backstopping it. They're going to make sure this happens for you. And I read the statement originally and said, I'm pretty sure if this were a contract, that only applies to the boxed retail versions, not the digital ones. That's how you would write that. If you wanted it to apply to both, you'd use a semicolon and a numbered list and all this fun stuff that you pay lawyers to do. But it doesn't actually say that. And I said in virtual legality on Monday, I wonder if they don't mean to help the digital refund policies at all. And what this wound up being, which really came to clarity the next day, was all they were saying was, hey, you know, various places have refund policies. Why don't you go check those out if you aren't happy? And it's like, that's what? The entire reason to put out this statement is to say we're going to fix it, and then if you're not happy with the schedule we just put forward, we're going to help you. And when they're talking to their investors, they say, everybody got that wrong. We didn't talk to anybody. Everybody just has refund policies. And it's like, oh my God, you were right on the line of deceptive consumer communications, like right on the line, and with actual legal ramifications. And as we talk about on my channel,
real quick question: you say actual legal ramifications?
Yeah.
Do you think there could be any legal ramifications from this? Could people actually sue them?
So ultimately, no, I don't. And people ask me this question on virtually every story I put out. But so the thing that they're really running up against is how much are they deceiving the consumer? How much were they deceiving the consumer by holding back that video? Because consumers can see the video isn't available and they buy it anyway. How much is that deception? How much is a statement like this deception? You can opt for a refund. And these places have refund policies. And then on the investor call the next day saying, well, no, they have refund rules. They'll be fine. The consumers will be fine. You know, how much is that deceiving the consumer? Because in the US, at the federal level and at really every state level, it is a violation of the law to engage in deceptive trade practices. But the Federal Trade Commission, the various attorneys general in the states, the United States, they mostly are focused on things that really, really hurt you. Pharmaceuticals that kill you, refrigerators that spoil your food or poison you, things along those lines. What we're talking about here is a luxury good, a completely optional purchase that was for $60. And when you throw on, as we get to the end of the week here, Sony and Xbox and everybody else saying, okay, we'll do refunds until at least December 21st, then you don't even have damages. The federal trade, well, what would you want us to do? It's like sue them for being bad? Yes, you can do that. The act allows for that. But if you have otherwise given recompense, you've made the consumer whole somehow, then you're way down the list of things that any of these governments want to deal with, especially in 2020, where any kind of suit or combination against CD Projekt Red would be seen as, don't you have better things to do? Don't you have bigger fish to fry, vaccines and whatnot? So no, I don't think realistically there's a lawsuit here. And I think especially with the refunds available, there's not that. You could see regulatory agencies that have fine capabilities, especially in like other jurisdictions, the European Union, maybe Australia, that like to fine consumer companies a little bit more, go in there and say, none of this was all right. You're gonna fine a certain amount of money, or you're gonna donate money to some charitable cause, whatever it's gonna be. That might happen because this looks really bad. But ultimately, what we're talking about here as a story is business partners, CD Projekt Red, throwing Microsoft and Sony and GameStop and Best Buy and everybody else under the bus, and what that looks like when you don't properly prep that statement with your partners. That's what the rest of this week is.
Yeah, that's well said, Hoeg. I mean, it's clearly, as we see, and we haven't heard too much about, from Microsoft per se, but something interesting happened with after that, apology letter came out. Obviously, the backlash from Sony. But one of the things that was interesting too, which relates to this game, was that even like sites, we talk about like how bad some of the bugs are with this game, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm playing this on PC right now.
Okay.
I have a decent rig. I have a 2070 GPU, a AMD 2700X CPU.
All right, you're much fancier than me. This is why I play on my Series X.
Yeah, so and I have a Series X and PS5 as well, and I just decided, you know what, let me go with PC. I felt like PC was probably the best place to play the game. And I 20 hours into it, I'm starting to see bugs now. And the one thing that I'm going to say about the bugs and how CD Projekt Red has really handled the situation, because clearly they haven't handled this well at all.
Right.
I would say that a lot of their moves and how they've handled this have been very anti-consumer. What really is striking to me, Hoeg, and what drives me bonkers. We talked about this on Crossfire last night on Mooch's channel. By the way, if you didn't get a chance to check out Crossfire, check it out on Mooch's channel. But we talked about this last night, and what was shocking to me, and I said, obviously this smells and stinks of greed, right? They want their publicly traded company. They got to, satisfy their investors, make money, et cetera, right? So let's get this game out. Let's not potentially hurt sales by revealing some of the issues that this game has. And the part that kills me is, if you really want this stuff to stop, as gamers, don't buy products like this. Don't damage control for the developers. I've seen a lot of damage controlling. I hate that word, by the way.
I think I called my video on the investor call the damage control call. So
yeah, I mean, I just don't like that word. People just don't hold these developers accountable or companies accountable, and I'm seeing it with CD Projekt Red, and I'm seeing things where, like, Adam Badowski is liking tweets of people saying that Sony's overreacting, things like that, right?
Yeah. He's got to defend his company. It's hard for me to say. It's also hard to say where the buck stops. Adam isn't in charge of the board.
He isn't. But why would you like something? Where so example, he liked the tweet that said, somebody basically says Sony's decision is ridiculous. He liked that, right? Like, why would you I feel like if you are really sincerely sorry about this, you wouldn't like that. You wouldn't go out and say, like, a tweet that says Sony is overreacting essentially for pulling this game from their storefront. And I see things like people saying, oh, the media is using this for clickbait, or I'm having fun with this game.
I have got a lot of subscribers talking about Cyberpunk, so thanks, CD Projekt.
Yeah, exactly right. Content creators have actually done quite well for themselves because it really blows my mind to see people just say things that are things like, oh, well, the media is doing this for clickbait, or, it's not really that big of a deal. I'm having fun, or I'm playing on the Series X and that version runs the best. So I'm not having any issues. I'm having fun. Like, that's all. Look,
I definitely have issues. It's fine. I mean, it's AAA gaming, unfortunately.
To me, that you can acknowledge that you're enjoying the game. Like I said, we said this earlier in the show. It's a good game. We both are enjoying it. But there's an issue here. There's an issue where they purposely misled consumers, and they also put their business partners in a kind of precarious situation, and so those things need to be called out. It's like you can like something and say, you know what, I like the game, but outside of the game, I don't like what CD Projekt Red has done.
Yeah, that feels like my life on YouTube, basically. Just trying to tell people this point, which is like, well, how did you buy a PlayStation 5 after you did a 15 video series on Sony? It's like, well, because I don't think that they are the Empire from Star Wars. I think they've made some bad decisions, and we can call them out on that. But I also don't trust, have faith, or am a fan of any corporate entity. They put out a product. If it looks like a good product that's worth more than the money in my account to have that product, I will go get it. And so CD Projekt Red in this particular instance is like, yeah, I feel worse about your company now than I did 10 days ago. And I will be thinking twice about X, Y, or Z purchase from you. But as it stands right now, the fact that I have been enjoying Cyberpunk 2077, which I 100% have been, doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile discussion to have, to say you did intentionally keep this stuff back. You clearly don't know what you're doing with your statements, your investor call. It should go to business schools about what not to say to relatively milquetoast questions. And those are all worthwhile of consideration, because the only way things improve, the only way the signals are sent to these companies is if you have the conversation. And in terms of the folks that are saying this isn't that big of a deal, I'm not sure that the most anticipated game of the year, I think on most lists, being delisted by the biggest console hardware platform supporter in the world, I don't know what would be a big deal if that's not a big deal. This is a very, very significant story. I hope that they right the ship at CD Projekt Red. I hope they satisfy Sony. I hope Sony relists it when they're satisfied on a reasonable time frame. But them taking that action right now, and then when you can juxtapose it with their major hardware competitor at Microsoft going a different direction and really diverging, it's a fascinating, awesome story to consider and to talk about when you don't get these kinds of really significant inflection points very often.
Yeah. And it's interesting with Microsoft, they obviously took a different route, but they also have like a warning label.
Yep. They added that last night, I think. Yeah.
So and OpenCritic actually recommended that people don't even buy the game.
Yeah, I got into a fight with the OpenCritic president, I think, on Twitter.
Oh, you did?
Because I didn't recommend that language. They have some editorial. There's, I think in the middle of their statement, they say something along the lines of, like, we suspect they're actively trying to harm consumers or deceive them. I think you use the deceive language. My preference is to stick, especially if you're running a place like OpenCritic. We're on a podcast. You can, all of this is covered by, these are our opinions, right?
Yeah.
But when you're putting a formal statement on something like a review aggregator, I would stick to the facts. If OpenCritic should say they clearly withheld the footage, they had strong NDAs, that means that wasn't incorporated into a lot of these people's reviews, and let the readers make the next step as to what happened there, rather than we suspect nefarious intent and all this stuff. It's just not a great. I don't know who their legal counsel was that vetted that statement, but yeah, I got into it with the president on Twitter, where I was like, you can do whatever you want, but it's not what I would recommend.
Wow. but it's interesting. Like I've never seen a game. I've seen games be pulled before. Like I know 2015 Batman Arkham Knight was pulled from Steam because it was having a lot of issues.
Yeah, because it didn't run or something, right?
Yeah. So that's not, so we've seen that, but we've never seen anything at this level where you have sites like OpenCritic, you have Microsoft themselves putting warning labels. I mean, this is, like you said, if this isn't a big deal, then what is, right? Like, this is a huge deal.
I mean, at least in gaming. I never pretend that virtual legality or anywhere else is, global politics or anything. But yeah, as far as this topic goes, I can't imagine anything bigger, because if this happened to some middle of the road nothing game, it would still be an interesting story. It happened to Cyberpunk, for Pete's sake. This is the game that they've been at the top of people's lists for years.
Years, yeah. I mean, and look, they made a lot of money off. They made, they had like 8 million pre-orders.
Yeah, other stupid things not to do if you think you're going to have to go out with an apology. Don't tout your pre-orders the day before.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Oh, we got 8 million pre-orders. It's, we're profitable and all those things. They're cashing in their checks. But, the other thing that was interesting. So we know about the Sony thing, and what I've heard too with Sony is, because people have been talking about the certification process, right? And that's another instance where I thought CD Projekt Red kind of threw Sony and Microsoft under the bus a little bit, where they were like,
exposed. This is like the journalist argument. They exposed what are these kinds of trust bridges in these relationships. And the one thing I would communicate to people on that is, people think you can write whatever you need in a contract. You can put whatever you need in a requirement. There's always going to be an element of trust. Nothing is coming in completely done in 2020 in video game land when it goes and gets certified. So you are going to get fixed. You are going to get things certified as patches later on. Going gold isn't the same as it used to be. You have day 0, day 1 patches. And there's an element of that trust relationship. Sony, if anything, if you want to say Sony looks bad in this at all, it's that they trusted CD Projekt Red, and then it appears like they really didn't have a problem with the game being available until the refund apocalypse happened. That's when they moved against CD Projekt Red. It wasn't when the game released. It wasn't, this thing, it wasn't even when the Digital Foundry video came out. It was after CD Projekt Red asked them, told their people to go get refunds. And Sony said, no, that's not what we do. And I don't know. I think there were a dozen articles about Sony denying people refunds even after CD Projekt Red told them they could have them. And if you're following how the entities work, it's like, well, it wasn't CD Projekt Red's power to give once they released it to the market. Mm-hmm. So they had to go have those conversations with Sony. They didn't have them with Sony. Sony was pissed. And then you get Thursday night.
Yeah. And my understanding too is CD Projekt Red had what's called approved developer status with Sony.
Oh, okay.
Meaning that, they trust them. Just exactly everything you just mentioned, Hoeg. Like, they trust them. There's a level of trust, professionalism, right, at a professional level.
Yeah, because it will burn you. Because you can have that trust. It's not just, we have to live on a handshake. It's that when your incentives are aligned that much, you can trust somebody. When you're a giant corporation like Ubisoft or Activision or Electronic Arts or CD Projekt, you could say, well, we can trust you because, my God, if you didn't fix this, it would be apocalyptic for your launch. And lo and behold, it is.
Exactly. And so they had something called approved developer status. And that, again, essentially, we trust you at a professional level. CD Projekt Red was going to fix these things, these bugs, right? Day one. And that's another point of contention I had with gamers who were, coming into my Twitter or my tweets and saying, oh, how can you judge this game? You haven't played it yet. It's going to be a day 1 patch. It's not a big deal.
And it's a tricky thing. Yeah, it really is. And I feel for reviewers on this kind of stuff because there really are massive performance changes that can happen in the last, 3 months of development. And if you have to go gold early enough and then you delay for 6 weeks, I mean, this was really weird. They delayed after they went gold, right? Mm-hmm. Then, as a journalist, you say, CD Projekt Red has a good track record. They promise it'll be fixed. Okay, I won't make a big deal out of it. And it's not like CD Projekt Red's the only ones that kind of live on this timeline. Everybody else kind of says, "Oh yeah, no, that'll be fine by the time we release. We might even improve the frame rate by the time it releases." Mm-hmm. And there are enough games now that have had significant, really massive improvements in how they play. A couple months after release, that it's easy enough for someone that's inclined to already trust the party that they're reviewing to say, "Okay, well, I can see how you could probably maybe fix that by the time it comes out." But you should never assume that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of my point. Like, we can't assume that, things are going to be fixed day one. We know now, looking back at it, that's not the case, right? That's why we're having this conversation today.
Right. I got icons floating across my screen. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And so they lost approved developer status at Sony. Like, Sony's like,
did they?
Yeah, they did. Sony is not. Sony, from what I've heard from sources, again, not happy. Clearly not happy. We know they're not happy because
they're going to treat them like an indie developer.
They are. Well, they don't have that trust anymore. They
shouldn't.
Yeah, they shouldn't. They removed them from that approved developer status, and that's a big deal. And Sony, and I think in that investor call too, if I'm not mistaken, I think CD Projekt Red actually did admit that, hey, we didn't maybe live up to our end of the agreement.
100%. Yeah, they straight up say that.
Yeah, like, and I'm like,
we think they trusted us and we didn't do it.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I'm reading that, and I'm like, what? Like, what is going on? Like,
yeah,
could that be any more blatant? Yeah,
that was a terrible answer.
Yeah,
and that was a terrible set of facts, of course, but it was also a terrible answer to frame in that way. They aren't crisis managing, and I think to some extent you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's that they haven't had to. They haven't been in a crisis like some of these other game companies have been in, and so I think one of the questions people ask me is, well, how does this happen? Because you knew what you were doing, you knew what you were releasing onto the market. How does this all occur? And I really think they just haven't had the experience dealing with a somewhat angry, even a partially angry fan base, and a much more willing to bite them journalistic kind of presence. And so you just go out there and it's like, yeah, we thought we'd get cert done. We didn't. People think we did something for the refunds. Nah, we didn't. But hey, it's not like the game doesn't launch or anything. Is a whole paragraph they have. It's like, oh, okay.
but Hoeg, I guess, okay. So here's my thing.
Sure.
If they, maybe they don't have, like you said, experience in crisis management, right? Compared to like an EA or an Activision, but still, like, they can't be living under a rock either, where they don't see or have seen issues like with, remember Hello Games and No Man's Sky. Remember that?
Okay, so Hello Games is the one that I brought up in my videos, and they did a great. I mean, as it turns out, if you're going to put in the time, this works. They did a great thing by just going to ground. They went and hid in a cave for like a year, right?
Yeah.
CD Projekt is one of the biggest European companies in video gaming. It might be the biggest. It depends on the market cap. It might not be the biggest now after the stock in the last couple of days. But they're one of the biggest companies. They're publicly traded. That means they have to have disclosures of important events. They have to have things like that investor call. You saw when Sony pulled them from the store, they had a disclosure to their investment community immediately, like within 10 minutes, that said Sony's taking us off the store, because that's mandatory. And that's useful to folks like us who are talking about these things, because the PR is still trying to play tricks. By the time yesterday rolls around, they release a statement that says a decision was made to remove it from the store. This gets reported in like 4 different websites as CD Projekt Red took it down. And I'm like, the hell they did. Well, you have the board statement that says Sony took it down, and I was able to tweet that out to people.
Didn't they say they had a conversation with?
Yeah, they had 100% had a discussion. Yeah, and I'm sure it was a not heated discussion at all. But
it was a heated discussion.
I sarcastically said, I'm sure it wasn't heated at all. They had a discussion, and then Sony said, we're taking it down. I mean, like, that's the end point of the discussion. And then the board says to the world, Sony took it down, because that's what happened. The board can't lie in that capacity, because, I mean, anybody can lie, obviously, but if they do, that's not just, a shake of the wrist and Jeff Grubb gets mad at you. That's prison. I mean, like, that's fraud on the market. That's really bad stuff.
Wow. But again, like, I go back to the crisis management or lack thereof. Like Hello Games, like you said, that they kind of went underground, and they were criticized for that. They were criticized for that. But look, I mean, here's what the gaming community has shown me. If you're honest, you say, look, we effed up. We're gonna go back and work hard on this game. And you deliver. People have short memories in the gaming community. Oh, like they look at No Man's Sky. Like, people actually,
what a great story. Honestly.
Yeah, like, what a great story. Even Fallout 76. Bethesda was kind of mum about some of the issues that game had, and it's much better than it was when it launched. Right?
Yeah. I've only played on Game Pass, so I didn't play it before it was out there. But it seems fun.
But that's my point, though. Like they unless they're living under a rock, they have to see what other studios have done.
See, so one of the really interesting things, like, if you go and you take a class on this, you just watch YouTube seminars or whatever, is that everybody thinks they can crisis manage until it's their entity, until it's their crisis to manage. And then you really need specialists. The other thing you have happening, of course, with CD Projekt is it goes through a translator. So there are a couple of things even in their statements because they're coming so fast. They do those yellow background statements that they put out there. They've done like 4 in 4 days or something like that, which is way faster than they usually do. You get these translation issues. And so I am inclined to give at least some benefit of the doubt to some of those things, which is like, well, that sentence is clearly not how you would write it if you weren't moving at speed. So it's not going through the normal kind of vetting and PR and legal process, except for substance. And so I think they did wrong. I think this has been handled about as poorly as you could possibly handle it. But the primary thing they did wrong from my perspective is that before you go out with the statement you made on Monday, particularly the refunds, and maybe this means you can't go out with it on Monday, it has to be Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever, you 100% have to tell your partners that you're going to do this. They're going to say, you know what, we've gotten too much blowback on this. We think that people deserve refunds, and you have the conversation with Sony behind closed doors, and you have the conversation with Microsoft behind closed doors, and your retail partners behind closed doors. And if you get a lot of pushback from them in that context, you figure out maybe that's not the thing that you do in your Monday statement. Or at least if you've prepped the groundwork, now you can tell them, and you've helped facilitate it, and you're helping to work through the problems that those consoles might have. And yeah, it might require you to indemnify some portion of the costs of processing the refunds. It might require you to make some active step that you didn't want to take if you're CD Projekt. But to do this and to say, look, we're just relying on all the facilities that are already in existence. They'll give a refund if they want to give a refund, and everything else is completely wrong. And what you get from Sony, people come into my comments and say, this game isn't any worse than, I don't know, what one do they keep bringing up? Life of the Black Tiger or something that I have never heard of? That's on the PlayStation Network. It's not about Cyberpunk being worse than that, or Fallout 76, or No Man's Sky, or any other game, Last Guardian's performance, whatever it is you want to be. It's not that it's any worse. It's that their partner threw them under the bus, didn't tell them in advance, and they wound up having to brook all of these negative ads and all of this friction because they weren't honoring the refunds that CD Projekt promised. And you start to do that to your major hardware partner, you get burned like you did on Thursday.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Ho, because I've had people say that to me. Oh, it's not any worse than Fallout 76, or what about No Man's Sky? It's not. But that's not the point, though. The point is how they handled it. The messaging, them throwing their retail partners under the bus, Microsoft, Sony under the bus. But let me ask you something, Ho. What do you say to people who say, well, they didn't promise a refund? They just said you have the option of opting in. I
think it's like I said, I think they're playing tricks with the English language, right? So the opt-in language is pretty close. It sounds like you can opt into a refund. That's going to be a program that we help facilitate. Then that's kind of backed off in the next couple of sentences where they say, go talk to PlayStation, go talk to Microsoft, go talk to your retail partners. So it's not really what I would consider a strong legal commitment. And then the last sentence comes in and says, and if that doesn't work for you, we'll send us an email, which apparently only applied to the retail side of things, which you can kind of read as correct, but is deceptive to someone that isn't reading things virtual legality style. And I do not blame one single soul on earth for not consulting with my videos to go sentence by sentence when these corporations talk. So it's when you release a statement like that, it's undoubtedly inclined to make people believe they could get a refund if they wanted one. The idea of that statement is you don't want a refund because look at all the stuff we're going to fix, and you just need to stay the course with us. So the reason that statement goes out is not to offer those refunds. And that's clear by the time you get to the investor call. They didn't want to offer refunds. They just wanted that to be said, hey, if you're really worried about it, this option would be out there for you, but you don't want to hit that button because we got a patch coming next week. We've got a big patch in January, a big patch in February. You're going to love it. And you've been waiting for this game forever, so you might as well play it right now. It's going to be great. And then the refund stuff happens, and Sony's like, a lot of people are asking us for these. And if you're CD Projekt Red, you're like, well, probably not a lot. But when you sell 8 million pre-orders and 4 million of those are on consoles, if you start to have 1% of people that want a refund, you're talking about 40,000 calls that PlayStation wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's not okay. You give your partner a heads up at minimum.
Yeah, I agree 110%. That was the issue that I had. I was trying to explain this too, and some people were saying, well, they never. I was trying to explain this on BRAP Wednesday, and some people were saying, oh, well, they never promised a refund. So I understand they didn't promise, but the way that the word, like you said, like the wording, the way it read, I could see where people might think, I'm going to get a refund.
Well, this is the problem I have with that kind of reading is like people want to say, well, they never promised it because they want to read it like a lawyer, except CD Projekt certainly didn't want it to be read like a lawyer for what they wanted the effect of the statement to be. They wanted you to take away, we're going to fix everything, and you could get a refund if you wanted it. And you don't want a refund because we're going to fix everything. But they want the overall scope of things to be like, we're still on your side. We're still gamers. We're still team players. You can go get a refund if you need one. That's your safety net. So you feel comfortable about all this. But you're not going to need one because we're going to make it right. And if that's the statement, if that's the spirit of what they get out there, then you can't come back and say, well, we never really said anything, because that's trying to have both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, you probably saw the tweets. People were very upset. Sony not.
I've only seen Cyberpunk tweets this week and Mandalorian. It's been a crazy week.
Oh, Mandalorian was great, by the way. But, you know, you see people reaching out to Sony and tweeting, screenshotting what Sony said back to them, like,
right,
hey, you know, you can wait till January.
That heat. That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you can wait till January, February for the game to like be patched, you know? And basically the people were upset that Sony wasn't giving them a refund. And again, that puts them in a very precarious situation now, where you have angry customers lashing out, and rightfully so, by the way. I'm not saying that customers shouldn't be upset, but now they're aiming their anger, in my opinion, at the wrong company here in this case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what happened, right? So Sony has a certain amount of goodwill. CD Projekt has a certain amount of goodwill. They tried to cash checks against Sony's goodwill, and Sony said, what in the hell are you doing? And that's that discussion on Thursday, and which ends with, yeah, sure, we'll offer refunds, but then it's coming off the store.
Wow. And, you know, I had people say, I also saw people saying, well, I can't believe they're taking it off the store. That's anti-consumer. What about people who want to play it? I'm like,
all right, we could talk about the flip side too, because like Microsoft rolls in yesterday and says we're keeping. Well, doesn't say anything about taking it off the store.
Yeah. So, but I don't think it's not anti-consumer to take it off the. You could still buy the game. You can still buy a physical copy of the game if you wanted to, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are people with let's say you have a digital only PlayStation 5 and you're out, right?
Yeah, you are out. That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. But again, I mean, do you think Sony maybe overstepped the boundaries here though? Like with doing this, do you think this is?
Well, we can talk about two questions there. Overstep the bounds has a connotation to me. Do they have the right to do this? 100%.
Yes.
Was it a good strategic decision? I think that's your argument. And
yeah,
when Microsoft decides not to delist it, or at least not as of that moment, and I think it was the most likely time that they could have, so I don't think it will be delisted on Microsoft. When they decide not to do it yesterday, you wind up with these two, what I described as gambled positions. Both sides are gambling a little bit. Sony's gambling on taking off one of the most popular games of the year, or what appears to have been on the road to that, off of its system during the holiday season, and saying you can't buy it digitally. And having conversations like this one where some people will say that's anti-consumer because consumers should be able to have the choice. And there's a version in the PlayStation 5 that, yeah, maybe hard crashes a lot, is mostly acceptable to people that are playing it over and above the baseline PlayStation 4. And I don't have a good read for how the PlayStation 4 Pro was treating it. And so Microsoft goes the other direction and kind of gambles and says, well, look, a lot of people don't like this on the one. So we're going to put this little warning note that nobody is ever going to see on the web page. And we're going to say in our Twitter thread, a lot of people are unhappy, but CD Projekt Red's really worked hard on this, and they're a hardworking company. And so we're going to offer refunds to everybody. You can go get a refund if you want. And that's the end of the statement. We're not going to do anything else. Yeah. It's exactly the same as Sony's statement, except Sony has the last sentence that says you're out, and Xbox doesn't say anything.
Yeah. It's interesting. You bring up a great point. Like they're kind of like gambling on both ends. And
right. Well, Xbox has the risk, because people say, what is that risk of Xbox? Yeah. And Xbox has this risk of, well, Sony does look like they are protecting consumers, that they feel like this particular product is not worthy of being on the PlayStation 4, and they're protecting consumers from spending $60 on something that they know that they will be unhappy with. Mm-hmm. Microsoft could lose a narrative battle with Sony that says, hey, we care about our consumers. You only care about money. And you're going to let people that are going to get a one version under the Christmas tree, and they're going to hate it. And you don't care because you got your pound of flesh. And it could win that narrative, but they might not, because Xbox can go and say the opposite and say, well, look, you and your walled garden and trying to keep everything locked down is preventing people from being the masters of their own domain and picking the game that they want to play and deciding for themselves whether 10 frames a second is something that they can live with or not. Well, and Microsoft has that right. But when you take this in its overall scope, it is a really great symbol of how these two companies have diverged in this generation. You've got the walled garden. You've got Sony building the walls higher and saying, we're going to protect you. We're going to try to Appleify this thing and make sure that you're happy with the experience. Microsoft saying, nah, we're an open system, Game Pass. We got backwards compatibility. If you want to play this game, even if it operates like trash, we want you to have that option. And also, by the way, we might have spent tens of millions of dollars already connecting our brand with the Cyberpunk brand, and we'd prefer not to burn it down completely. It didn't cost us nothing to bring Keanu onto the stage. So here we go.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was going to ask you, like, how much of that fact that they have the marketing deal played into that decision not to remove it from their storefront, a la Sony.
It's a different calculation. It adds to it, absolutely. Sony had an easier decision to make there than Microsoft did, because right now you still have TV ads ending with the Microsoft logo. You still have billboards with the Microsoft on the corner. So this would be a really, really, really bad thing for Microsoft to do. Not to say that they wouldn't do it, because the other side of the gamble is, and I talk about this in my video from yesterday, not to put too fine a point on it, but in corporate, I say America, but really across the world, one of the easier things to do is follow the leader, is to say, okay, Sony did this thing. I'm not going to take an enormous amount of flack for doing the same thing, because that was the decision that was made. Going a different direction, you have to justify that. You can get burned. And they clearly think it's valuable. They clearly think it's useful to be the only digital storefront that you can get Cyberpunk on as of yesterday or Thursday night. And so I really do think that you're seeing these two business models for the first time since the generation started really show why they are separate and why they are different.
That's a great point, Hoeg. That really, I didn't even think about it like that.
I see. This is the perils of only thinking about things in business, economics, and law terms.
No, it's great. It's very insightful, and it's a great point. It really puts things into perspective. You know, kind of the motivations behind maybe why Sony did this and why Microsoft is kept the game on its storefront. And you know, I've thought about that too. Like I've also thought that maybe, I understand why Sony did it. It's kind of like, hey, like, you're not going to come in here and try to throw us under the bus. You know, we have a reputation to protect. You know, we've built this brand, this goodwill with the gaming community over the last 25 years. You know, you're not going to do anything to hurt that. And we're going to show you who's boss, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also think, you know, maybe Sony may have overstepped the boundaries. And I get the business decision behind it. Like,
you know, it was a bad idea.
Yeah, like maybe not. Yeah, because it's like you could do something to the effect, well, you know what, play at your own risk, and be forewarned that you may not get a refund. You know, like do something like that in writing, right? And give the consumer the option to buy it. Look, I'm all for.
I truthfully believe there isn't a wrong. Somebody might win at the end of the day in terms of like raw dollars or how people perceive them, but I think you can justify either side of this.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree with that. You know, and I that's what I'm saying. I don't think Sony made a bad move, but I do think they could have made a different move too, where maybe they
at some level you're playing with precedent too, right? Yeah. So it's, if Sony just offers refunds, one thing that Microsoft might have to deal with, and I know they have slightly different refund policies, is that you open it up to Cyberpunk, you do wind up answering the question of Fallout 76 or whatever game you want to bring up, which is, we don't want to be in the business of just offering refunds. At least not very strictly delineated, quantified refunds like Steam. At least everybody understands the Steam rules, right? And so I think Sony's like, we are not in the business of doing this. And so if we are going to do it, we are going to make it obvious that this is a special circumstance. We don't pull games off the store. We're adding that. We're going to make clear that this is not normal, so that if somebody comes back and says they're unhappy with the frame rate on The Last Guardian or whatever, then they can't point to the Cyberpunk scenario and say, well, you've done it before.
Exactly.
So I think Sony's protecting that at the same time. They don't and Microsoft could run into that. Microsoft could run into a bit of difficulty there.
Hence the gamble you mentioned earlier, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's gambles all over the place. This is, you know, there's a lot of articles about CEOs and presidents making too much money, but in all honesty, you know, Phil Spencer's decisions on this could be worth 30 to 300 million going left or right. And so, yeah, if you make the right decision there, you earn your paycheck to some extent.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a great point, Hoeg. I mean, this is what makes this thing so fascinating, because we've never seen anything like this. It's great. Like, I love it. Like, this has been like,
I don't want people to get burned. I wish Cyberpunk were just flat out awesome and everybody was loving it. But I mean, if it's not going to be that, this is a great story to talk about.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's the tragedy here too, is that this is actually a good game. I know people probably think, "Oh, I'm hating on the game." No, it's not a bad game. It's a good game. I wouldn't. Again, my opinion, I don't think it's at the same level as The Witcher 3. I still think that's their.
I don't think it's in the same league, or maybe the same country that the league plays in.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good game though. I mean, it is. But the tragedy behind this is that much of that's being buried under how CD Projekt Red has kind of handled this, and they've even gotten flack for pulling another game off their PC digital storefront, GOG, which
Devotion. I covered that this week too.
Yeah, and so it almost seems like CD Projekt Red just can't catch a break this week.
That was moronic though. Like, so that added to the fire. So Devotion was a game that got stripped off of Steam because it had a joke in it against the Chinese president. Got removed from Steam. I think it was almost 2 years ago now, very early 2019. And lo and behold, they put out a tweet and says, "Hey, we're coming back to GOG. GOG's bringing us back," which is a weird week for it to happen anyway, because GOG is owned by CD Projekt. You're like, well, that's odd. It's been gone for forever. What are they trying to do here? And then, like, within an hour, GOG comes out and says, due to requests by gamers, we're not putting it on our store. It's like, I don't believe you. I don't like to accuse people of being liars because I don't know what's going on in closed rooms and things like that. But it's like, after this week, after everything that's happened with Cyberpunk, I refuse to believe that quote unquote gamers told you not to put Devotion up. Now, maybe, Chinese gamers or people that took issue with the original release on Steam, but gamers overall as a class of people. And that's one of the problems. It's one of the things we've dived deeply into this week in videos on CD Projekt, is that whether or not you realize it, when you listen to statements from anybody, whether it's a person or an entity or what have you, you've got an element of trust, whether it's a 0 or a 10 that you're applying to this statement. And when you burn that all to the ground, when CD Projekt is now no longer trustworthy, you just have to analyze everything that they say. When something like Devotion happens, which might have some kind of innocuous explanation, you go and you say, I think you're lying to me. And that is hard to quantify. But when they talk about losing reputation and building goodwill for 2 decades and burning it in a week, like that's the impact. Is the next time, Witcher 4, Cyberpunk 2, whatever, that they try to do anything, your initial reaction is going to be, I think you're lying. And then prove it to me the other way, which doesn't mean they can't do it. As you say, gamers are forgiving. And if the product is good enough, they will absolutely forgive you. But it means you've got a higher hurdle to clear, a higher barrier to cross. And it's a lot harder to get those 8 million pre-orders in the door.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we're at with them. I mean, we're questioning even that, them removing that game from their digital storefront. Yeah. We're questioning that. Like,
terrible.
When they said
it looked terrible. It was like an hour.
Yeah. And then they said gamers. I'm like, come on. Like, really? What gamers? Who are these gamers? And you're right. They may be gamers, in China. Or something like that.
Well, I mean, because everybody's reading it the same way. It's like, okay, you don't want to offend China. All right, fine.
Yeah. But yeah, don't put the onus on. Just be like, there's issues with this game.
Gamers want to play Devotion. I've only ever heard good things about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's oh my, very interesting times. And I don't see things getting better with CD Projekt Red anytime soon.
There's
a lot of work to be done. Yeah.
Management, communications, and all this, the actual act of selling a video game, they got a lot of stuff to solve. They got a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
I think that the actual making of the video game, the artists, the developers, the technicians, I have full confidence, I honestly do, that it will be relatively fixed, 99% fixed in 2021. And that we can then talk about the design and how I think it's probably an 8 out of 10 instead of, the 10s and 10 things that people gave it. But, that it will be an experience that is what we probably should have gotten. And it probably should have released, if we're going to be, hey, it has to be functional and fully done, in like November of next year. And once that happens, I think we'll have a quality product. And whether or not people forgive them for that is an open question. I suspect they will do what they did with Witcher, only much more grandly, giving free DLC and free quests and other stuff, and maybe some kind of discounted long form story DLC. The big story DLC patches were supposed to come like next year and the year after. There were a bunch of questions on the investor call that said, "Hey, you haven't hit a deadline in 3 years. Should we trust these deadlines at all?" And they say, "Well, it's too far. Who knows?" It's like, well, that's not terribly helpful. But that's what I think that they will wind up doing. Now, I do think with a week like this, at least a head will roll. I think in general,
I was going to ask you that. Yeah,
you sacrifice someone to the.
There's got to be fallout. Yeah. Yeah. Who do you think that's like the CEO?
It's hard to say. So CD Projekt has a very specific story. Small company that just gets big, and so I think mostly its founders are still running the show, which isn't always great. A lot of the times, people that are the founders that have that kind of drive to make something small into medium size aren't necessarily the ones that should be running the billion-dollar entity. But I strongly suspect you'll have somebody, step down or step into an observer role or things like that. They might not make a public show out of it other than to tell people that they're making changes and that they're evaluating. There might be a report that they commission about how this all happened, that kind of thing. That's what you generally do. But I would suspect, one or two folks at a high level, executives or board members or something along those lines, will at least be shuffled around. That's kind of your benign version of this, because you need to show folks that you're doing something.
You know what the irony of this whole thing is too, is that Cyberpunk is about corporate exploitation.
I was going to say it's a game about corporate exploitation. Yeah. Well,
and here we are.
I think one of the things, I was writing a description to one of my videos where I was giving the definition of corpos. And I said, hey, maybe making a game like this for a decade just rubs off on you in terms of business practices. Who knows? And that's, hey, if you go and you actually play Cyberpunk and you don't have it bug out on you and you play some of the stories, it's all about kind of satirical corporate exploitation.
Yeah, and that's again, that's the irony. And there's the fallout too from this too is I've been hearing that a lot of developers in house are very unhappy, looking to leave the organization because of this. It was even reported recently. There's a Bloomberg article now where developers on a video call really question leadership about the handling of the game. One employee asked the board why it said in January that the game was complete and playable when that wasn't even true. So like look, it's unfortunately this is, people want to, I see people blame the developers per se. I don't think that the developers wanted this game to release in the state that it was in, or wanted to, say things like, that the game was, because you got to remember, they said the game was running fine on or working on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and consoles, right? They actually said that. We know that's not true after the release, but they are not happy internally. And then, remember the issue about crunch at CD Projekt Red, these long hours, right? Mm-hmm. And to have to deal with this, I really feel bad for the developers. I really do. And
well, I mean, the delineation is always difficult. I mean, what can we say about this? The project was mismanaged. Mm-hmm. It definitely wasn't ready for release. You can always point to mismanagement for 4 separate release dates in 1 year, right? That's a bunch of wrong stuff that happened in terms of getting the game out the door. So the thing that I will say is that I have no doubt that those people believe those things and that those statements are legitimate, and that they are rightly frustrated with, at bare minimum, having a product out there that they've spent a good chunk of their lives on, have this happen to it at launch. But I'll also say that the project managers, as ineffective as they appear to have been, and the wrong choices that CD Projekt has made, the art of project management is always dealing with the folks creating the thing saying that we need more time. Like knowing when that's true and when it's not is the trick. And clearly CD Projekt Red did it wrong, but it doesn't surprise me at all that people have gone out and said, well, we told them we needed more time and these deadlines weren't right, and management is bad, and et cetera, et cetera. They've been working on this game in at least part for more than a half decade. And so the project managers probably needed to control this thing 3 years ago. But at the point where you hit 8 years on, The Witcher 3 released, 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
5 years ago, yeah.
You do, in fact, need revenue to pay the people at your company. So it's always a tricky thing for me. This is where I start sounding like a corporate lawyer, right? There is always a multifaceted reason for this stuff happening. And some of that's going to be on developers and quotes and engineering and what they told their project managers. And some of that's going to be on bad project management. And some of that's going to be on bad executive orders and trying to tell the project managers what the project needs to be and when the release windows need to be. And from afar, it's very difficult for us to know any of that. And whether it's the Bloomberg articles or the Jason Schreiers of the world going out with this, they're only ever going to get specific voices. And those voices are always largely going to say the same thing for any project, which is, it could have used more time. We would have preferred not to work this much on weekends or what have you. And all of that is useful information. All of that is worth talking about. But it becomes a very difficult task, in my opinion, to separate signal from noise on anything. And we really only get the reports when there's a tire fire and a crash like this one. So it's, I always take it with a grain of salt. I think it's useful. I've no doubt that there is that friction in the studio. I've just seen things that have been very successful that have that friction, where people are upset with project management or the board or executives or whatever, and it gets to a successful conclusion. I don't think the actual things that we're seeing out of those articles are suggestive of a completely broken process like so many people want to attach to it.
Yeah. Let me ask you something, Hoeg. If you were CD Projekt Red's lawyer.
Well, I quit because they didn't listen to me on any of their statements this week. So they're no longer my client. No, continue.
What would you advise them to do next?
From here. Okay.
Yes, from here, moving on.
Okay, so you've created the bathtub of slop. What do we do now? So I will tell you, chances are their outside counsel and probably their in-house counsel have been on emergency calls since at least the Sony decision. Hey, look, I got you $2.
Yeah, Lucius. Great to see Hoeg Law on another podcast. Thank you, Lucius.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think that they've been on those emergency calls since the Sony decision, and really, that's what you're going to try to fix first. You are aimed solely at trying to figure out what Sony needs to make it happy. And apologizing and falling on swords and getting statements and managing that business relationship. From a legal perspective, there's not a ton to do. This isn't contracts. This isn't that kind of thing. Nobody's likely to sue you, probably. So you're advising the in-house people as to what to focus their efforts on. You're probably also reading the Sony terms, the Sony cert requirements, whatever else they might have sent in an email or a writing. But that's what you are focused 100% on. You're also trying to simultaneously maintain your Microsoft relationship, make sure they aren't freaking out, maybe negotiating things about the marketing spend share, depending on how upset Microsoft is. Microsoft hasn't really shared with the world how they feel about all this. They are undoubtedly upset for the same reasons that Sony's upset as of Monday. But how upset are they? Are they seeking changes to the contract relationships that you have with them, with the exclusives, with the custom Cyberpunk Xboxes? Those are the kinds of things that happen when you've got crises. So you've got contracts to look at. You've got people that want to go out with statements. You've got those statements to vet. But in all honesty, if they went out with that Monday statement and those investor call stuff, I'm not their lawyer. I'm not. They're not going to listen to me.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that's really interesting. My job is to be a representative for other people. I'm the knight that comes in and hits people on their behalf, or negotiates the deals for them. But one of the things that is really interesting about the lawyer-client relationship is that there is a point where you advise the client and you think it's really important that they not do something, or that they do something, and they ignore you. And maybe that's okay on a one-off circumstance, or maybe even a multiple circumstance. But if it becomes really serious, I jokingly say I would have quit, but it's like, this wouldn't have happened if you had listened to me. And so at some point I have to say, well, if you're not going to listen to me, this isn't a relationship that's going to work.
Yeah,
I have, ethical things to do, et cetera, et cetera. So what am I doing? I am trying to keep them from saying more stupid stuff, and I'm trying to keep them from offending their business partners.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing with Sony, I wonder how long is this going to last too? Like, is it a matter of, them, because I know there's a patch coming January. Does this thing go out through January where Sony's like, you know what?
Got a patch yesterday night, right? And it's unclear whether or not that patch was the quote unquote December 21st patch that you see referenced in like the Best Buy emails and the GameStop emails. I'm not entirely convinced they weren't reading the Monday statement wrong, but I'm hopeful that they actually had conversations with CD Projekt. So it's unclear whether that was the patch or whether this upcoming one will be the patch for December 21st. But those retailers are putting a lot of their eggs in that December 21st basket.
Wow.
That things will be fixed by then. I don't know whether Sony is getting the same message or a different one. And it also depends on how much pain Sony wants to inflict on this. So Sony in general, when you talk about this relationship, usually everybody's aligned. Sony makes money when CD Projekt Red makes money and vice versa. So they want the game in the stores. But Sony was clearly very offended by how this all went down this week. Yeah. So generally speaking, I tell people that corporations don't have feelings and that at the end of the day, a big enough pot of money on the table will cause everybody to come back together. This is how we talked about the, I don't know if you remember, I think it was last summer, the Sony and Disney Spider-Man tiff. Said, he'll be back. Yep. I'm like, there's too much money. There's too much money here for it to be gone forever. But, they'll probably keep it off past Christmas. And once you keep it off past Christmas, will it be January? Yeah, maybe you make them wait till the January patch. I don't know. It really comes down to what they're thinking, and that is absolutely mind reading from out here.
Yeah, and I gotta think though, if this patch does address some of those issues, that perhaps because I also don't think Sony, because you're right, this is a big title. Sony is going to lose money by not having this game on their storefront, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so they're selling a lot of PlayStation 5s, and they clearly have that big base. They might not be worried about people just fleeing to Microsoft for it. It's hard to say. It's so much analytics and what they're looking at.
Yeah, that's true. I just think that with the holidays coming up and people getting digital gift cards, whatever the case is, they're going to be on the digital storefront, utilizing some of the digital currency that they may have received during the holidays. That this is a hot item game. Like I can't imagine that they would keep and I could be wrong, obviously, in my opinion. I think that they would probably. They probably knew about this patch that they released last night, right? Now, again, whether or not that patch addresses some of the major issues, another story. But if it does address some of the issues, at least, let's say it does, right? Where the game's maybe working better. Better could be subjective, but I got to imagine that maybe Sony may say, you know what? We suspended the game for a duration of time, because we don't want to have set that precedent with any developer or any publisher that they can do this, right? We're going to have the store back in time for Christmas or maybe after Christmas where people are, or the holidays where people, have digital currency, they're looking to spend, buy games. And this is a hot item game. I mean, this is the big title right now, I think, during the holidays.
It was certainly scheduled to be, yeah.
Yeah, despite
I'd recommend Immortals, but hey, we can have that conversation later.
I've heard good things about Immortals, by the way.
I love that.
Yeah, I've heard some really great things about it. That's my opinion. I think that I don't think this thing's going to go into January. I could be wrong, but I see Sony kind of slapping the hand a little bit here, maybe a week, and then putting the game back on their digital storefront.
Could be.
Yeah, we'll see though.
See. I mean, it really is. It's dependent on so many things that we can't know. And one of those is, does Sony want to really make it hurt because they want to send that signal to CD Projekt and to everyone else that you do this and you're gonna lose revenue for a month, or is loss of revenue for a week enough? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, we can all speculate, but we don't know.
It's just guesses. Yep.
The one thing I heard too, you talk about, how Sony's kind of offended by this. I did hear from our good friend Optimus Code, and he knows people. He's a former game developer and knows people in the industry. He's hearing that in part some of the reaction from Sony has to do culturally too, being a Japanese company and having that Japanese culture's big emphasis on honor, right? And some of that coming into play.
I mean, I've had a number of clients that are in foreign jurisdictions, European, Japanese, Korean. And yeah, undoubtedly there are cultural influences on how everybody lives their lives. I will say that when you get to multinational corporation, 9 times out of 10, you're talking about trying to achieve your goals with whatever decision you're making. You hear me describe them as things like being angry or upset. And that's true from a business perspective. It's not really an emotion at that level, though. It's trying to say, okay, this isn't right. We don't want this done to us. What do we have to do to try to minimize the chance of this happening again? What message do we have to send to CD Projekt? Certainly you get on the call and you're angry. That's fine. You're a human being. But what does the entity do? Honor and trust and not breaching promises is important. It's not. I think people might put a little too strong of an emphasis on it in terms of corporate decision making.
One last question for you, Hoeg, before we wrap up.
Sure.
Should this game have been only developed for next generation consoles? I should say current gen, because now we're in a new generation, but current gen, Series X, PlayStation 5.
Well, the interesting thing to me on that is, like, you can't do that because they started developing it before the specs were remotely close to out for the next gen, right? But I think one of the interesting questions is, should the game, even as it sits right now, because I don't know if people know this, but the game that has released is not a Series X or PlayStation 5 product.
No,
the reason it works on those consoles is that it brute forces the backward compatibility for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One version. So if you go and you listen to these conference calls or read the transcript, it gets very confusing because they refer to it as current gen, last gen, old gen, and next gen. And they're always talking about just the one product. And I do think there is a case to be made, and I call them out on effectively lying on the investor call about this, to say what we've got right now, whatever you want to call that code, is the Series X / PlayStation 5 version. And it should have just been that. And then you could have said, I get an enhancement next year, and we're going to work on porting it backwards to the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. And they didn't do that. I don't think there's a mechanism really to allow them to do that because of how this has gone, other than to say that is the X version. And then maybe you run into issues with Microsoft or you run into issues with PlayStation that says, no, you can't. That's not. It doesn't look anything like a PlayStation 5 exclusive. The textures are bad. I mean, they clearly are. They're not built for this next generation of systems. But I think that might have been your best out, as you just say they're next gen exclusive, even with the current code as it sits right this second, and try to work backwards from there. Because one of the things they come up on their conference calls, like, no, we never worked on a next gen version. We're working on it now, ray tracing and what have you. And it's like, that's fine. But what is out in the market right this second is realistically the next gen version. It works the best on those. And so you should have tried to figure it out from there. The problem is, why did it come out in December 2020? It's the tail end of the old generation. They want that consumer base.
That's what I was going to say. So that decision was definitely financially driven, right?
Yeah. Well, but you talk about bad project management. It was always built for those. When they come up on their investor call and their statements and say, well, we didn't address the old generation, you were definitely not building to specs that didn't exist when you started this project. So you screwed it up. And at some point you said, well, we really like the shinies on the PC, and then we'll try to backfill it from there. And it really only works when you have shiny CPUs in the Series X and the PlayStation 5. But don't lie to us. You've sold this as a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One game for years and years and years and years and years.
But it's not.
In fact, your marketing right now calls it a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One game that also plays well on Series X and PlayStation 5. All of that is backwards. All of that makes you think, are they dumb? No, it's because of the way that this branding works. But what they put out there probably should have been treated right now, the way it functions, as next gen exclusive, and then work on this process for the older gen next year.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Because of what's happened with this game, and we talked about this on BRAP Wednesday. I posed a question to the panel. I do think Microsoft, as relates to Halo Infinite, that Halo Infinite should just be a Series X or Series S, whatever, console exclusive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it might well be. I mean, who knows? Certainly the new pictures look significantly better than the one we saw in July.
Yeah, yeah. much better than Craig. So.
He made some good thumbnails.
He did. He did. Yeah, great memes. Great Craig memes, by the way. Yeah, this is just fascinating. I mean, I've been gaming a long time, and Hoeg, I've had people compare this to ET on the Atari 2600.
Oh, for Pete's sake. These are people that weren't alive then, I take it?
No, they were live. That's where they're they're saying this could kill the industry.
No.
They're saying it jokingly though.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, it will be fine. But there's certainly lessons to be had here, and I do think this is an opportunity again for consumers to kind of stand up and say, like you said earlier, Hoeg, that you can be critical of the things you enjoy.
Yes, yes, you can, and it doesn't make you a hater.
Yeah,
fact,
exactly.
It's useful.
It is useful because you don't. Ryan Landis in live chat says ET actually worked. It actually did work. Games actually.
I had ET.
Yeah, games worked back then. By the way, and I see this notion of every game has bugs. That's not true, by the way.
I think every game does have bugs, just not like this.
Yeah, Nintendo will say hold my beer if you say that, because Nintendo games, first party games. I mean,
I don't know, man. I've been playing Age of Calamity at what might be 7 frames a second. I know it's not fully first party. But if that performance was on one of the other big systems, you'd probably get a similar blowback.
Yeah, probably would. Yeah, I would agree with that. But yeah, I just look, hold these companies accountable, and just stop with the excuse. That drives me nuts.
Yeah, have the conversation.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing with all fandoms. It's like, hey, I'm a fan of CD Projekt Red's work. I am 100%. Witcher 3 might be my favorite game of all time. I'd really have to
it's a great game.
Parse that out. And I like Cyberpunk 2077, but it doesn't make any of this stuff right.
No, it does. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, well, Hoeg, I just want to say on that note, thank you again for coming on, hanging out with us this afternoon.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your insight. Again, I was trying to get you on a couple weeks ago when
and I apologize. I had to back out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I get it. You're busy. It's a busy time of year for everyone. And, certainly, again, appreciate your insight. Everyone in the live chat, by the way, if you haven't visited Hoeg's channel, please check it out.
We will welcome you.
Yes.
We are inches away from 30,000 subscribers, which I would love to hit by the end of the year. So come, subscribe.
Yes, there's in the description section below, you will see a link to Hoeg's channel. Please check him out. Really, really great video, insight into, just gives you a different perspective of the gaming industry from a legal perspective, business perspective.
Yeah.
That you just don't get anywhere else, Hoeg. And I mean that. Like, I'm not aware of anyone else on YouTube who does what you do.
I don't think so. I mean, the legal YouTube is a small enough cast anyway. So you have some entertainment folks, some IP folks. Legal Eagle's the biggest one, but he mostly does scripted stuff. We talk about news items. I mean, the premise behind Virtual Legality was, really, you hear that people get taught to think like a lawyer and see the world slightly differently in law school and all these things. And I think that's true to some extent. But we get so many stories. And if you read video game outlets, and you get so many business stories about mergers and acquisitions and contracts and decisions and licenses. And a lot of times they're just a little bit off. And hopefully with a background like mine, who's done corporate law now for God only knows 15, 16 years, that I can offer insight, hopefully, and have fun doing it, talking about the stuff you're already reading about. So whether it's talking about Spider-Man between Disney and Marvel, or gee whiz, Cyberpunk burning its reputation to the ground, hopefully it helps you understand those stories a little bit better. So we love having fun in the channel. 2020, as bad of a year it has been in virtually every other aspect, has been a wonderful year of growth for Virtual Legality. And so, yeah, come check it out, and we'll have fun talking.
Absolutely. Again, everyone, check out the link below. It's in the description. And Hoeg, I just want to say again, man, pleasure having you on. Have to get you back on again. As things develop here with.
Well, there's more videos coming in the Cyberpunk series. Yeah, that's why it's a playlist now.
Oh, that's hilarious! Become a playlist.
It is. I think it's 9 videos. Yeah.
Is it 9?
Well, so I have the crunch video from like 3 months ago, and then I have like the delay video, and that's the front end of like 7 videos that came in this last 10 days or so.
Yeah, you know what, Hoeg? Next time we have you on, we should discuss crunch and this idea.
You'll find my position similarly nuanced in terms of like what we talked about with respect to developers like having their issues with management. There's blame in all corners to go around.
Yeah, it's interesting. David Jaffe just put out a video about crunch.
Okay.
And it was really interesting. He's obviously coming from perspective of someone who's, developed games and has done crunch. It's just, it's one of those things that just keeps coming up. And he made an argument of why maybe unionizing developers may not be a great idea. That's something that's been talked about a lot. So next time we have you on, we should definitely talk about that. I'd love to get your perspective on.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Absolutely.
And even unionizing, the idea of unionize. I can't even talk. Unionizing developers in the gaming industry.
So. Well, you get the perspective of somebody who's lived and worked in Southeast Michigan his whole life as well there. So unions can be great sometimes, and they can be god awful other times. So you'll get both perspectives there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Hoeg, again, thank you again for your time. Appreciate your insight as always. Thank you to everyone in the live chat who came by to hang out with us this afternoon. Certainly appreciate your time. We had over 200 people watching. Please hit that like button. Hit that like button.
Like button. Come on.
Yeah, we should have more likes. And
I'm going to do it right now.
There you go. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, hitting the bell notification so that you are alerted when we go live. Look, I know the holidays are here, but we will be podcasting through the holidays. We will be back on what I'm going to call our Christmas Eve show on Wednesday, the 23rd. And then we'll be back April, or what did I say, April? December 30th.
I thought that was a long break.
Yeah, right. December 30th, we're going to have Lord Sovereign from the Iron Lords. Been trying to get Lord Sovereign on for a long time, but he works a lot. So IOP is great. Cognito and all those guys. So So everyone, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy your time video gaming, because there's some great content out there. As Hoeg mentioned, Immortals is a great game you might want to check out from Ubisoft. And if you're enjoying Cyberpunk, that's awesome. But other than that, we are out. And everyone, again, have a great, safe weekend. We'll catch you next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, make sure to check out Hoeg's YouTube channel on the description below. On that note, we are out, everyone. Thank you again.